All right, good evening, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to our Technical Communication Speaker Series. We're from the Department of Technical Communication at Mercer University, and Dr. Gallagher, Dr. Vance, Dr. Goode, and I'm Dr. Goode and Dr. Brewer. We all invite you and welcome you to tonight's session. It's 6 o'clock Eastern Time on November 17th, and we're going to be talking about 20 resume tips to launch your career or your next career. This is something that evolved out of our department discussions when we were meeting and talking about the resumes that we see. One of the most popular assignments that we teach in TechCom 341, our introductory course, is actually the resume assignment, believe it or not. And we get a lot of positive feedback because students love the time that we spend on teaching you all how to write and design the document that is the resume. Of course, TechCom is not a resume or career services profession, but we do have some nice tips to help you design the content, the tone, the style, the layout, the presentation, and design of documents. And we just decided to apply that to resume because resumes are upon us for internship and job seeking season. So we thought that might be a good time to revisit some of these tips. So each one of us has selected 5 best topics or best tips to share with you tonight, and we'll be going through in rapid fire style to present them. So we'll start with Dr. Gallagher and we'll clip along all the way through to Dr. Brewer, and at the end we will take questions. So we hope that you'll enter your questions in the chat box if you're in the live session tonight. Thanks again for joining us, and with that, I'm going to turn the speaker over to Dr. Gallagher, who's going to take us away on our first set of 5 tips.
Thank you very much, Dr. Goode. I'll kick us off tonight. Can everybody hear me okay? Somebody give me a thumbs up. All right, excellent. I'm going to kick us off. And as you'll see, my passion as a user-centered designer and visual communication scholar really influences the advice that I'm going to be sharing tonight. My 5 tips all offer information about the design of successful resume documents via their visual elements. So starting with number 1, which you see here, it is use a professional font. Fonts, or more broadly, typefaces, define what our letters look like and what our words look like in our documents. And as such, all fonts have unique personalities based on their appearance. Some fonts, as I'm sure you're aware, can look quite silly, while others very formal and elegant. Some are really bold, and some make us feel comfortable, while others feel like they're giving us technical information. But regardless, we want to make sure that we're choosing the right font for our particular situation, especially when we're applying for a job. In this situation, we often want a font that may be interpreted as familiar or technical. So first, let's consider fonts for resumes. A professional font for a resume really needs to be both legible and readable. That is, we need to be able to easily recognize the letters and read the words as they're strung together in the document. The font for our purpose can be either a serif font, that's kind of like you see with Times New Roman and Palatino linotype on this slide, where they have the little marks or little feet on the end of the letter forms. Or they can be sans serif, like you see with Calibri and Helvetica, where those little marks or feet are gone. But no matter which we choose, it must be something that's comfortable for our readers to see, to look at, and to read easily. So on the slide, as I mentioned, there's these 4 examples of what we typically think of as professional fonts: Times New Roman, Palatino linotype, Calibri, and Helvetica. Times and Palatino are both serif fonts considered more traditional and more familiar by a lot of users, whereas Calibri and Helvetica are sans serif fonts, and these are usually seen as more technical, bold, and sometimes modern. We want to make sure that as we're thinking about a font for our resumes, we choose a professional font like these or similar that fits with our own personal brand and the personality that we want to convey based on the position and our relationship to the company. Slide, please. My second tip this evening is about using space meaningfully. In traditional resumes, space is at a premium because, well, there's only so much of it. If you're trying to fit a lot of content in a page or two, that doesn't leave a lot of room for adding a lot of material. Our gut reaction sometimes is to put as much in there as we can and fill as much space as possible. But often that's a bad idea because it makes our resume seem dense, sometimes intimidating, and it can be hard to tell what goes in what section, as readers sometimes encounter with these really heavy walls of text in resumes. A successful resume instead tries to balance use of what we call positive space, that is that filled space, and negative space or empty space, and do so meaningfully. That is, by using negative space within and around the contents of a resume, like you see in the experiences section here from an online resume, it makes it easy on the reader to read the content, to parse out the different parts, to understand the relationships between the types of content and how they all work together. And space helps encapsulate and build these relationships. So thinking strategically about our margins, boundaries, spaces around the text that group text together or divide that content apart and make it meaningful in those ways is my second key tip tonight. Slide, please. My third tip is to use purposeful spot color. And you're actually noticing that as we move down the list of my tips, the one that we're highlighting actually pops out at us and use this bright green color to draw our attention to it. Spot color is using that small amount of pigment to affect attention around a piece of content, like you're seeing in the list here. In a resume, you can use spot color to make headings stand out, just like the work experience heading you see in this example section from a resume. You can also use it to do things like emphasize your name, which you always really want to stand out at the top of your document. Make it big, make it blue, make it stand out from the rest of the content. And you can also use spot color to draw attention to specific areas in documents using things like background color or highlighting or shading. However, spot color can also be used to create that opposite effect. That is, you can use soft or muted pigments to reduce attention to some contents. You'll notice on this slide the dark gray of the body text here. It has less saturation, and that causes us to see the red first, and then the saturated black of the job titles, and then that gray next. And that controls the hierarchy of what we're looking at and when we're looking at it in a lot of ways, just by using color to create these different effects. Slide, please. My next to last tip, number 4, is to use traditional document design with some exceptions. Since resumes are a traditional professional document, there are a lot of design and formatting elements that we picture when we think about a resume. We think of that big name at the top of the page with the contact information right under it. We think about headings for education and work, and perhaps even skills and awards, and all of these are divided either by space or line work that separate them on the page. And each may also have a series of bullets that provide pointed details about each of those sections. Because we have all these preconceptions about what a resume contains and what it should look like, we think of a resume along a lot of what we call design conventions. That is, there's certain rules that everybody seems to follow that make a resume a resume. And when we break these rules by making our resume different somehow, we can run the risk of confusing the reader. Maybe they didn't get the document they were supposed to. Maybe they can't recognize it as a resume right away. And this might alienate them from our document. And that's bad. We don't want them to feel estranged to the content that we made, to our resume. We want them to love its design. So if you don't really know if your potential employer is looking for pictures and graphics and lots of color and diagrams, it's usually best to stick to a more traditional resume design, like the one on the white background that you see on this slide, instead of the more visually aligned resume on the yellow and black background that you see next to it. Slide, please. And this brings me to my last tip, number 5. And number 5 is do not forget the crap. And even though it's funny to say CRAP is really an acronym for a set of design principles that are commonly used for making documents. CRAP stands for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And all four of these design principles are involved for creating successful documents like resumes. For example, using the contrast principle is involved when we do something like create emphasis with spot color, like we just talked about. That is, by using that small amount of color, we can create contrast to make some elements stand out from others, or to help other elements recede into the background for the reader. Using the principles of repetition, like repeated lines or bullets and lists, can make the sections and details of our experiences quick, easy to see and draw out, and easy to navigate and follow along for our readers. Using principles of alignment, we can line up our headings and our subheadings throughout the document to create a sense of symmetry, to create a system of hierarchy, and to craft a document that boosts our professional appeal and our ethos, our credibility. And last, we can use principles of proximity by linking information together, putting it in close relationships with each other, or breaking that information apart by using distance and space, which we talked about. That can help our readers get a sense of the complete picture of content in different sections of our resumes, and that way they can go right to the information they need when they need it. So based on these design tips, you can deliver a professional looking resume, but that isn't all. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Bremen Vance for his tips. Dr. Vance.
Thank you, Dr. Gallagher. There are some great bits of advice in there, and the focus on visual elements is certainly really important. The first look, the visual appeal of your documents can certainly make a major impact. My advice for you all is a little more focused on the content, and maybe will help you come up with things to say or how to frame your materials. My first bit of advice is that you should be thinking about the ways you are presenting yourself and what you have to offer as a service for the potential employer. And you want to be thinking about the fact that employers are hiring because they have a need. They need somebody to do a specific kind of work, and you want to try and explain that you offer a service that helps fill that need. And so if you're building your materials, you want to be kind of, again, trying to solve a problem that the employer is likely to have. If you really focus instead on your accomplishments and your credentials, you might not the employer might not quite see how you are going to fit into their organization. The credentials and your experience should be used as evidence that you are capable of providing the kind of service that they need, and support that narrative. But you really want to be thinking about another way to think about this is what is your brand? How do you fit in the organization? What problems do you solve? And this is related to my second point, and we can take a look at that next, which is that you need to be thinking about and reflecting on the language and the mindset of the people who are hiring. It's possible that the language you're familiar with in the work you've been doing is not quite the same as the people who are hiring. We sometimes use similar language in different contexts to refer to the same type of work. And we want to do a little bit of investigating, both by reading the job ads and maybe reading a little bit about the organization and how they think about their work, so that we can talk about our work in the same kind of way that the hiring managers are thinking about the work. It goes a long ways to helping them feel comfortable that you are the best fit and that you understand the work environment you're trying to be a part of. So if possible, I think for these first 2 points, it is really quite productive to pre-interview the employer. And what I mean by that is, if you have a contact in the organization, talk to them a little bit about what they understand about the organization. If you don't know somebody in the organization, you still want to do some due diligence. You can research and find materials in a variety of ways. You can try and call people and talk to them about the work they do if they will give you the time. There's sometimes a contact person on the job ad that you can reach out to and get a little bit of information from, and that can help you better understand the problems they're having and the language they're using to talk about that problem. And if we'll get to the next point, I think it's really important in a lot of documents that I see to kind of be very clear about the difference between your skills, your abilities, and your accomplishments. And we don't want to necessarily mix them up. It is possible to kind of be thinking about our degrees or our certifications as skills that we have to offer. Your employers are really wanting to know what you can do for them. And so it's, I think, very important to not just rely on those documents, those accolades you've received. You want to explain how those accolades demonstrate your skills and abilities. And you want to name those skills and abilities and show what you've been doing and how that works. And this is really my next point too. You need to balance your discussion of your skills with examples of you applying those skills. And as you talk about your work in both the resume and in the letter, having a good explanation of naming your skills and talking about your skills, but also backing that up with evidence of projects you've worked on or workplaces you've been a part of, or the credentials you've earned will help demonstrate that, yes, in fact, you do have those skills. And picking your references strategically will also help reinforce that idea. But again, if you're thinking about the skills you're bringing and how it solves your employer's needs, you'll be in pretty good shape. And then finally, we want to think about the letter as that place where we're really demonstrating our fit, and we're pulling out key ideas from our resume or from anywhere else to really contextualize what we think our skills are, contextualize our experience, and drive home that message that you understand the position you're applying for and how you're going to help your employer. Okay. And with that, I'll turn it over.
Thanks, Dr. Vance. Those are great tips. So I'm going to go through these pretty quickly, but one of the things that I see a lot of are a lot of lines, rules, boxes, and dividers on resume drafts. And I encourage you to minimize those or eliminate them altogether. Lines tend to break up documents and they don't create unity because they make the reader stop and pause before going on. And certainly at a major level heading, that's an okay thing. But if you have underlines and lines and rules throughout, it can really break up your text. And instead of keeping it as one cohesive document, it can cause the reader to kind of feel that the content is disjointed. So as a design principle, try to avoid lines. Next, you want to standardize and repeat your content elements. So if you have a title for a job, you should have the same format, placement, color, design, font size, etc. every time you have any job title throughout the resume. And so also similarly, if you have a location like a city and a state, it should also be in the same style, format, size, and location as all the other locations are formatted throughout the resume. Dates should all be formatted similarly. Descriptions should all be formatted similarly. So standardize and repeat. Do the design work once and then just reiterate to help your reader reduce the cognitive load and focus more on the content that you're trying to share. Next, if you're not already doing it, I encourage you to keep track of KPIs. These are key performance indicators that measure your level of success. That might be something like, I was the leader of a club and we increased our revenues by 100% over a period of a year. Or it might be, I reduced the waste by 25% on a campus recycling project. Measure what you do so that you can share your successes in numeric terms with employers. They really like that. And it shows that you're paying attention to your own personal value. You're providing data-based evidence of your success. Next, maintain and create a professional portfolio and make sure it's linked on your resume. Many people use LinkedIn as a portfolio, and that's a great place to start. In my particular field, instructional design, it's becoming more and more prevalent to have a separate website or professional portfolio that shows a lot of the examples of work and projects that you've done. It showcases your proficiencies and skills in a lot of the technology that's used in the field and the profession. And so it's another opportunity for the employer to connect with you. If it's on the resume, chances are, if you're interesting on a resume, they're going to click over and find out what's interesting on your portfolio. It's just another way to win them over to your expertise, skills, and talent. And then finally, research the organization and team members online. I know Dr. Vance hit on this a little bit earlier with some fantastic tips on reaching out to the organization. If you don't know anybody, that's okay. You can look on LinkedIn. You can research their company stats on Google and even in Wikipedia and some of these other more universal websites that kind of give a 3,000-foot view or even higher view of the organization. Find out what it is that they do. Find out the types of people that work there. Find out what they make, what they're known for, what their culture's like. Those are some things that you will want to work into the style, the look, and the feel of your resume to make sure that you have projected yourself as a great fit for them. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Brewer to wrap up with our last 5 tips.
Wonderful. Thank you all. I will build on all of those great ideas. First, I'd like to address the tip of using keywords. Today, organizations quite often use machine sorting on resumes, particularly that are submitted. So in other words, it might not be a person who first reviews your resume and cover letter. It may be a machine. And for this reason, it's critical that you use keywords from the job ad in your resume and your cover letter. And I even suggest that you go through and highlight those in the ad and in any research that you do. Make sure that you have pulled words that are most important for the type of position you want, and then that you use those in your resume and cover letter. Okay, next slide. Show rather than tell. This ties into Dr. Gallagher's idea of concrete and with Dr. Goode's tip about KPIs. You can claim to be a good leader. You can claim to be technically skilled. But if you've ever noticed in generic resumes, that vague approach doesn't really tell the reader anything. What impresses them is your use of showing. So instead of telling them that you're a good leader or an experienced leader, give them examples of when you were a good leader. You can still do this in very few words and in list fashion, but you should have very little tell and a whole lot of show when it comes to the resume. Next slide. Prioritize your limited real estate. You want to take your mansion, you want to take your highlights, your greatest strengths, and use them first, show them first on the resume, because you are designing and writing for Skimming, and you will typically get the most emphasis for those items that appear first on a resume. The second most important part of real estate would be the last position. And so you want to think very deliberately about where you place your most important items. There is a traditional flow in a resume, but you can customize that in order to better show off your strengths. Next slide. When human beings do review your resume for the first time, statistics research shows us that they may spend as little as 30 seconds skimming through your materials. And so you need to design with that in mind. You can kind of tell, all you got to do is look at a high level at these 2 examples, that on the left, you have very little space. As Dr. Gallagher was talking about, you have very little contrast, and that makes skimming very difficult. It would take longer to extract the main points from that example on the left, and it would take less to extract important points from that resume on the right. So think about skimming. For those of you who have any experience with usability, you can test this out with people. Have them skim it and let you know how long it took. And final slide. I've read over and over again how writing a good objective or a good summary is one of the first places that people go to get a sense of you. All of the prior rules or tips would apply to this. You want to show rather than tell, and you want to be specific and concrete. So a good objective is going to tell an employer very specifically what you're looking for, right down to naming the job and right down to naming the job. Typically, an objective is only a sentence or two, a short sentence or two. A summary, on the other hand, seeks to show your reader what you've done in the past as it relates to your objective. And so typically a summary is a little longer, adding a sentence or two. They're both short, they're both very concrete, and you want to avoid those canned objectives and summaries. Where I would be a great fit and I'm looking for an opportunity that would offer me, no. Go with the concrete, what you're looking for, and if you're summarizing where you've been. With that, I'm going to wrap up and return it to Dr. Goode. Thank you.
Thanks so much for our TechCom professors coming out tonight and delivering these great tips. Students, I hope you've gotten some great ideas from this and thinking about how you can apply them already to your own resume. Your resume design and content does reflect who you are. That's your knowledge, your experience, your attitude, your skills, and you need to showcase that. It's like a walking billboard for what you bring to the employer. And so we want them to see that and snatch you up. And so think about how design, think about how your content, think about how your words convey who you are and why you're valuable. Hey, if you enjoyed tonight's presentation and you're thinking, I'd like to tune in more about what TechCom's got going on and some of the courses that we offer related to workplace success strategies, I want to highlight 3 things. TechCom 230 web design, we're going to be building portfolios in the spring. So that would be great if you're interested in doing that work. TechCom 250 communication and management does a great overview of managing teams and people and projects in the undergraduate space and within the curriculum in the engineering school. And TechCom 630, managing people and projects, is open for our graduate students. So hope you'll consider one of these courses that we offer, and we'd be happy to take your questions at this time with a couple of minutes remaining.
So Dr. Vance, so thank you for everybody for the great tips. I have plenty of notes over here, and I look forward to applying some of these, especially for the resume. But Dr. Vance, you were talking about interviewing the employer. How would you do that? Like, what's the difference between that and like looking them up on, say, the company website and taking notes?
So I was given this advice a number of years ago, and from someone who came out of a business school, and they talked about how it's common advice to try, if you can, to pre-interview by developing a contact in the organization. So if you can find somebody in the organization and find and have a good reason to chat with them, send them an email and say, hi, I would like to learn more about the work you do, or I'm a student, here's what I'm studying, and I'm very curious about your organization. Do you have some time to chat with me? If you can develop a contact and learn a little bit more about the culture, especially if that contact is in the area that you are hoping to work in, it can go a long ways for you to learn more about the organization. But also part of why this could be really helpful is when it comes time to apply, if you already have established some name recognition with someone in the organization, that also may be a benefit. So it's not always possible to find the exact people that you would want to have that relationship with, but it is certainly possible to do a little more investigating than we might get if we were just going through Google or going through the landing page for their website.
Thank you. And I think you said this earlier, but just to make sure, because this is just new to me, I noticed on Handshake, for example, or LinkedIn, they have people that you would reach out to sometimes, or you have like an HR manager. Would that be the person that you'd want to email?
I would probably start with that person, and they may also give you additional people to talk to if you have questions that they're not prepared to answer. And it's going to depend on the organization as to what kind of responses you're going to receive. So you want to make sure you're professional and polite about people's time as you attempt to develop that kind of contact.
Thank you.
Well, we're about out of time for this evening. I want to thank each of you for joining us. Thanks so much for your participation and your attention. We hope that you will continue to be on the lookout for our TechCom speaker series and attend the next one. It will be after the new year. So thanks for coming out, everybody. And we enjoyed having you. Take care. Good night.